Alright, now we are going to get into the sequencer on the Vectra. So we've got a little 303 demo sound I've set up here, and first we're going to go over and enter the ARP sequencer page here. Press that button. This takes you to your first screen here, which is full of initial sequencer parameters. Up top left here we've got our scale, and when we press this knob, as well as some of these other knobs, you're going to see the little keyboard icon light up, and that indicates that we are going to use the keyboard here to make our selection. And we've got the chromatic scale up top. We've got our major type scales down here, some of our pentatonic scales up here. Then we've got some wilder scales up here. And you'll notice that the clear key down here is associated with the chromatic, so when you clear out the scale, it takes you back to the chromatic scale, and that's what you're going to expect to play on the keyboard. Now the other thing to keep in mind is, like when you go to the major scale here, a major scale has 7 tones per octave. So with our 29 note keyboard, that gives us 4 octaves of the major scale plus 1 additional tone. Or if we go into one of these pentatonic scales that has only 5 notes per octave, now our 29 note scale is going to give us just 1 tone short of a full 6 octaves of that major pentatonic scale there. Let's clear this out for now. And then to deselect it when you're done making your choice, go ahead and click that encoder again. Below that we've got linear expose. Click the encoder, and that allows us to edit that value. Again, the keyboard icon comes on here to tell us that we make our linear transpose selection with the keyboard. Middle C is a value of 0, so we can play lower C and get minus 12. We can play upper C, get plus 12, and we can go all the way up to plus 16. Then below that we've got our X scale, which is a transposition of scalar notes. So when you're working only in the chromatic scale, since there's now 12 semitones per octave, that's going to work just like your linear transposition there. But if we were playing, let's say, the major scale or pentatonic scale or one of these other scales other than chromatic, this X scale then shifts by a number of notes within that scale. So again, middle C is a value of 0, and then as we go lower, we're going to shift down so many notes within that scale, and as we go above middle C, we go up so many notes above, and then we go ahead and deselect that. And let me clear that out first. The other thing is you can make making these changes on the fly while the sequencer is playing, and that can be a lot of fun. This X scale is very musical because when you're transposing it keeps them all playing within the scale that you've selected. Down here we've got the range. What this is an octave reiterations range. Again, middle C is our value of 0. Then we can select 1, 2, or 3, or minus 1, minus 2, minus 3. So if we're at 0, the sequencer is just going to play as we've programmed it. If we set it to plus 1, it'll play through as originally programmed, then play an octave higher. And if we were to set it for 2 or 3, again, it's just going to play an octave higher, an octave higher, an octave higher until it gets done with those 3. Then it'll go back to the original transpose setting of 0. Up here, we've got our clock. And this value here, the stop, just shows you the current state of the sequencer. We can press this to start and stop playback. Below that, we've got our tempo. And we can go down to 10 beats per minute all the way up to, I believe, 250 beats per minute. Another thing I should point out about the tempo is when the playback is stopped, we can also press the tempo encoder. And it's going to, instead of showing us the tempo, it'll switch over to MIDI. Now what that means is now the device is set up in a MIDI sync mode, and it's going to be waiting on a master clock to start playback. We just need to route our MIDI output of our master MIDI clock into the MIDI input here of the Vectra. Now you can't make this change while the sequencer is playing or while the external master is running. So if you are syncing to an external master device, you need to stop playback on that first, and then you can take this out of MIDI sync mode. Same when you're playing here in the internal sequencer. Playing, I'm unable to activate MIDI sync mode because we're already playing and that would be confusing. Down below that, we've got our swing value, and that's like a shuffle feel or humanization. So it ranges from 50%, which is completely quantized, 16 notes, all the way up to 75%. If we press this encoder switch, it defaults us back to the 50% value. Then we can press our ARP sequencer button once more, and this is going to take us to the second page of the sequencer. This page is what we call the sequencer show mode. And this is where all your parameters that are programmed into the sequencer are shown. This top right encoder defines what mode we're in. Right now we're in play mode. Here's ARP mode, fill, edit, and then we've got auto or real-time recording if we were playing. So this play mode is basically just a safe place to play sequences back. You can't edit the pitch, velocity, or rhythm here. You can see what's going on when we start playback. These values will be changing to show what the currently playing step is producing. You can, however, change the direction here. The D defines direction. Again, our keyboard icon pops up to let us know the keyboard is going to select our direction. Down here we've got down, here we've got up, and here we've got up, down, here we've got random. And beyond those, we've got numbers 5 through 29. And those numbers 5 through 29 are prearranged orders for this sequence to step through the steps we've programmed, kind of like our previous remix feature. I'm going to set that back to up. And then when we're done making our selection, we just press that encoder again to deselect that parameter. Below that, we've got our loop point. And again, the keyboard icon lights up, telling us we're going to make our selection of loop points with the major keys here, step 1 through 16. Right now it's set at step 16. If we press step 8, that becomes our loop point. And there's a little line here that represents the loop point, and you can see that change as we change the value here. When you are done making your selection of the loop point, you can deselect that. Again, you can change the direction, loop point, or the time signature while the sequencer is playing. And down here below the loop point is our time signature. So it shows you 4/4 here in the display. We've also got time signature written here as legends below these keys. And this is to help us define which keys select which time signature. So if you select this, 1/4, 2/4, 4/4, 8/4, and then you've got 3/4 and 6/4 up here. And we do that because 3/4 and 6/4 are similar, and they're on your minor keys up there, where these are going to be your more common used time signatures. And you can see the time signature block down here changes as well when we select those. Now the time signature will update at the next loop point in the sequence. The other thing I will point out is even though you can change the loop point on the fly while the sequencer is playing, when you do change the time signature, it's going to default our loop point to the maximum amount of steps for that time signature. If we go to 3/4 here, we can see our loop point has changed to 12 steps now. If we go to 4/4, it bumps us back up to the full 16 steps. So you just want to keep that in mind, that it will default in case you've got, let's say, 4 steps playing here, and you select a different loop point. It's going to kick you out of there just to give you the maximum amount of steps to play for that time signature you've selected. And so the way this is laid out, along the top here, these top bars are your pitch values. The pitch value ranges from 0 to 28, and those represent the 29 values of our keyboard here. So you are going to use just the built-in keyboard here to enter in your information into these sequences. You cannot hook up an external MIDI controller and be arpeggiating what it's playing or programming notes into the sequencer. There's no reason for it. Everything you need is right here. Velocity values. Even though a velocity value normally ranges from 0 to 127 as a MIDI value, we've shortened that range to be just 0 through 15. So those are evenly spaced steps throughout the velocity range, and that's because we don't necessarily need a difference of, say, a velocity value of 3 or 4. They're both going to sound primarily the same, the way that we can assign velocity to do all sorts of things, whether it's modulate the filter cutoff, or maybe modulate how much envelope amount goes to the filter, or more for envelope times, things like that. Below that, we've got R, which represents our rhythm, and we'll have to get into some of the other modes here to show you what those different values look like, but we can enter rest, note-ons, glides, or sustained notes. So let's go to our other modes here. We've got ARP, we've got fill, we've got edit, and auto. And so I think what I'm going to do here is first explain. For this demonstration, I've got a Roland TR-505 drum machine off to the side of the camera, and it is acting as a slave device. So it is syncing to the playback of our Vectra synthesizer here. And in the TR-505, I've set it up to where MIDI is set to sync and Omni is set to off, and that way we don't accidentally play those drum sounds when we're playing MIDI notes here, even though we are set to MIDI channel 1 and it is set to MIDI channel 10. So I can go here and start and stop my playback. Maybe what I'll show you first is how we can manipulate stuff on this first page here. So let's go ahead and start playback, and first I'm just going to play with selecting different scales. We'll do some linear transposing here. Alright, so that's linear transposition. You're already familiar with that because just about every sequencer already has that built in. Scalar transpose is a lot more fun. Let's show you that now since we've got the major scale selected. Now let's try these octave reiteration ranges. All right, you see how that works? Now let's play with the swing. So you see there how you can adjust the swing, increase the swing amount, and then hit this and bring you right back into a very tight quantized feel. Let's just show you what you can do in this play mode, changing the direction, the loop point, or the time signature. So we'll start our playback. Alright, so that's the direction. Let's change the loop point. Alright, and so it's often a lot of fun to break down a sequence into just a few notes, maybe 3, and then go into the scalar transpose. Let's try that. Alright, you get the idea there. Now we can also play with a different time signature. Let's set up a 3/4 time signature for this pattern. So now let's take a look at the arpeggiator, and let's go ahead and start our playback. Now when I start playing notes on the keys, even though we've got a sequence playing, it'll switch into the ARP mode and just start arpeggiating those modes. And since we're in play mode, we can switch it to hold mode or play mode. Play mode is going to be momentary. Hold mode is going to remember what we played when we take our hands off. So let's go to play mode. This is momentary. And you notice there, as I change this velocity value for the arpeggiator, that whatever new notes I enter in will be at that velocity value. Same with the rhythm part. So you can deselect all these, well, everything except the pitch. So the pitch you can't deselect because you're always entering those by the keyboard here. Velocity you can turn off and on. So if we turn this on and dial it down to a velocity of 1, everything we enter will be entered as a velocity value of 1, or whatever we select here. If we don't want to affect the velocity value, we can leave this off, and it'll play back at whatever is currently programmed to, and that could be part of a sequence that we've already created. Here we've got the rhythm part. As long as we've got this selected, it'll overwrite whatever is currently in the sequence with just note-ons. If we leave this off, the arpeggiator will continue to play a pattern of rest, note-offs, sustains, and glides that may already exist within the sequencer here, possibly from editing or creating a sequencer. Again, we can turn our hold mode off and on. When hold mode is on, it will remember the order of notes that we play, as long as we're holding one note while playing those other ones. Then once we let go, we'll stop entering note information, and whatever we've entered will continue to repeat. You'll also notice that this loop point, L, is currently set at 0. And as we enter in more notes, say we hold a 3-note chord, that loop point will automatically set itself to 3. And that's something you do have to kind of be careful of, is normally we'd have a loop point of 1 through 16 to define the number of steps to loop. But this arpeggiator is special in that it can go to loop point value of 0, which means it's not even going to play one step because all notes have been released. The other thing I'll point out here is, let's say we enter in a 3-note arpeggiation here. We're not only going to see the pitch value for the first 3 notes go to whatever we entered, but the remaining steps of the arpeggiator or sequencer will automatically fill with those same values. And that is cool because later on, let's say we're in hold mode. We held 3 notes, our loop point set to 3, But we don't really want a 3-step pattern. We actually want a 16-step pattern. So we're doing kind of this polyrhythmic slipping thing of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. That's great for that because then we can just change our loop point. We've already got those other values of those 3 notes spread out throughout the steps of the arpeggiation here. So let's go ahead and try some of that. Just notice what's going on here, and we're going to try playing using our hold mode. You may notice we're doing quite a few cool things that you can't even do on regular arpeggiators. For one, we're able to not only play a chord and arpeggiate it, but I'm able to maintain that chord and just slide my fingers at the same spacing down the keyboard, and it's picking up all the notes I'm holding. So that's really cool. Again, let's go ahead and enter in a 3-note pattern and then change our loop point now. Let's go to art mode. So the cool thing about this arpeggiator is you don't have to be just in the arpeggiator mode or just in the sequencer mode. They're shared. So we could enter in part of our information as an arpeggiation, say the pitches, and then we could go over here to say the edit mode or the real-time recording mode and enter in specific rhythmic or velocity values or overwrite parts of our arpeggiator. It's a lot of fun, and you just got to play with it. Another thing I'll show you here is let's go to, it's called auto mode when you're stopped, but we're going to start playback here. And I'm going to mute my drum machine here so I can talk over it. That auto mode becomes real time when we start playback of the sequencer. So now we can enter in real time the pitch, velocity, and rhythms as we play them in. But you'll notice down here below we've got this set parameter. And here's a cool way that you can just simply clear out a sequence. So this is our note rest or note off. This is our note on. This is our glide. And this is our sustain. So if we want to clear all the notes off, I'm going to turn this on, up. All I have to do is hit the set key. The other thing you'll notice is everything that's underlined is currently going to be set at its current value. So if I go here, enter in a pitch of, let's say, middle C, then say set, all steps are going to be written to that same pitch. Same if I went to velocity, if I said 15, pressed set, now all steps have been set to a velocity value of 15. So every time something is underlined, we are going to be entering that information. So we can enter in only specific information. We can't adjust it until it's selected. So let's enter just some rhythm information. I'm going to hit it to note on, unmute my drum machine, and tap in some note ons. And you see there, it doesn't matter what key I hit, I'm just entering in that rhythm. So let's maybe set it to glide. set it to sustain. Now we need some pitch information in there, so we're going to deselect our rhythm. Or I can drag my finger across the keys. Want some more notes happening? And if I don't like what I've got going on, I can clear them out, just like that. So let's play something in here. Now you can see that we've stopped. If we go back to where real time was, we're now in auto record mode. So let's go ahead and talk about auto record mode. Here we can deselect that. Now the thing that we need to do in auto record mode is first we need to queue up the step selection here. What auto recording is it allows us to stop playback and manually enter in notes one at a time here. So we select what we want to enter. So I want to enter note ons and I want to enter pitches, and we are currently at step 1 here. So as I play notes in for the rhythm and the pitch, we're going to see the step value increase. If at any time I make a mistake, I can just rotate this encoder, go back a step, and re-enter that information. Let's just try that. And when we get done, when we enter it in a full 16 steps, it kicks us out of that auto record mode. It doesn't allow us to enter anything in. Now we can just start playback and listen to what we entered. Now we're in real time. If we wanted to, if we had some mistakes or something, we could just instantly start playing over top of that to either edit or change what we entered. Now that we've got something entered in there, I'm going to show you what the fill mode does. Alright, so I'm going to start playback here and go to our fill mode. Here we've got our step selection underlined. I'm going to clear that out by pressing the clear key up here. Now we could select just an individual step using time signature bars that are laid out. So if I want quarter notes, I could press 1, 5, 9, 13. Now I've got quarter notes selected. So I can also shift the selection through time just by rotating this knob here. The other thing is if I wanted to invert the entire selection, since pressing one of these steps turns it off and on. With the 4 quarter notes currently selected, I can press 16, slide it down here, and now our quarter notes are all off while other steps are on. So basically we've inverted the entire selection. We can clear that out, and if we want to select all the steps of the sequence, again, just hold your finger at step 16, slide it down, you selected all the steps. We got to disengage our selection. Then we can select either the rhythm, velocity, or pitch, or any of those in any combinations, so that as we start playing notes on the keyboard, it's going to fill the steps we've selected with this rhythm value, this velocity value, or whatever pitch value we are currently playing. So if you want to override everything that's happening in your sequence at any time, you just select all steps, maybe you set it to glide, and now we can glide whatever we play. I turn up the drum machine. This time I'm going to make a different selection here. I'm going to clear that out altogether and now show you that you can use any of these minor keys that while we're playing we can tap in real time, and you see us selecting steps. That's easier to do when you're playing along with the drum machine, so I'm going to turn that up when we do it. Again, you just press that key to clear it out. But let's select just certain steps and then fill those and show you how that can be musical as well. As I was filling those glides there, I can change this offset of steps selected and get a totally different feel of what steps are gliding or what pitch is going to what steps. That's a lot of fun and something you're not going to find in most sequencers. The other thing we could be doing is changing our velocity value if we've got that set up for modulations or controlling the envelope morphing times, and that's really going to change the feel of those parameters. The other thing is, let's say we wanted just to mute steps, we could rotate this down to the rest or note off, have all the notes selected, and every time we play a note on the keyboard, it's just going to mute whatever's playing. When we release it, it'll go back to playing whatever's pre-recorded or entered into the sequence. So the fill mode is really cool. It allows us to play live over top of whatever we've got programmed into the sequencer arpeggiator. And it's non-destructive, so as soon as we stop playing, it just goes back and starts playing the original sequence. You just want to make sure you are deselected your parameters here when you're done editing them. So say you could go over here, maybe play with the transpose, select a different scale, things like that. And finally, we've got the edit mode here. So the edit mode is slightly different. This is a step editing mode, and you'll notice that we cannot turn off the pitch, velocity, or rhythm steps. Instead, they are always active to be edited. Currently, we can clear out our steps here. If we just wanted to select an individual step, we could hit any one of these notes here, and in real time, well, we can either do this stopped or real time, so we could go here and say, I want that step to be a glide, I want it to be this pitch and this velocity. Go to your next step. Say I want it to be a sustain, this velocity, this pitch. So it allows us to individually edit steps one at a time. Or we can go ahead and hit our clear key. Clear out our selection. We could select specific steps by doing that. And now as we edit the, let's say the pitch, this is incrementing every step that is currently selected. When we get to the top and they hit the headroom, they become maxed out and they all become that value. So if we bring those steps down, they all are the same value. Same thing happens when we go to the low end. Let's shift these, and so we can bring these other steps down. So now that they're all equal, as we increase their value, they are all the same. We could do some weird stuff just by offsetting these and making some slight changes. We could do that, or we could select all the steps, just quickly clear them out, bring them up to whatever level we want, maybe clear that, and again, our selection, if we are playing, we can tap in these minor notes to select in real time what steps we want to edit. If nothing is selected, we don't get to edit anything, so let's go ahead and select everything. We can clear out those velocities real quick. Keep in mind that when we edit these rhythm steps, they go in order, so you go note off, to a note on, to a glide, to a sustain. And those are your limits. So if we increase everything, it's always going to become a sustain. If we decrease everything, it'll become a note off or a rest. But we can have multiple different rhythm types, like a rest, a note on, and a glide. And as we increment their value, that rest note will become a note on, the note on will become a glide, and the glide will become a sustain note. And that's kind of cool for certain effects. Just keep in mind that if you go far enough, they can all become sustains or note offs. You may want that as an effect to then start entering new information over top of that. So let's just go ahead and start playing around and show you the different ways you can edit in real time. I'm going to turn my drum machine back on here, and we'll start playback. First thing I'm going to do is make some step selections. I'm going to tap them in. So I got quarter notes there. Now if I just want to get those off beats, I can just shift by 2 steps. Now I can clear that out, make a new selection, change the velocity values of those steps. And let's go ahead and now, while I'm doing that, that's just one way we can edit. We can also enter into the real-time recording mode while that's going on and just start playing notes over top of that. We can go back into the fill mode, fill some notes over top of that. Let's go ahead and clear out just the rhythm steps there, and now we can fill in just the rhythm part, turn the pitch off. now let's go ahead and enter in a complex rhythm. Let's deselect these parts. I'm going to go back to our arpeggiator mode and enter in just the pitches in our arpeggiator way. I wanted to show you there that if I'm playing with just the fingertip when I am entering an arpeggiator, basically the arpeggiator is only going to play the one note. My fingertip is touching. But if I use our auto glide technique of using more of the pad of my finger as I'm dragging, it always makes sure that at least one note is playing at all times as we play that next note, and that's how we are able to enter in an entire scale like this, just by dragging one finger up and down. So we've got this complex rhythm going on there. If we go ahead and select this, now as soon as I start entering an arpeggiator, it's going to overwrite those glides and those note offs with just note ons. So there's a lot of different ways you can interact and enter in information into the sequencer. Just keep an eye out when you are in these different modes. Pay attention to what is underlined and realize what can and can't be underlined. I'd say if there's anything confusing about this, it would just be if you've got your step selection here and you're entering notes and you're like, hey, how come nothing's going on? That's because you've got this selected and you don't have these parts selected, or vice versa. So just keep an eye on what's selected. And in general, if we go back here, when you select something, a parameter to edit, you don't always have to deselect it. You can select something else to edit, but that's going to stay selected until you let go of it. So for instance, if we have this set here, our playback is stopped. We hear absolutely nothing because we're editing this parameter with our keyboard. But as soon as we deselect that, our playback stopped. Now we should be able to play notes here. How come we are not playing notes? There we go. So if we're in the fill mode, it's not going to play notes, but generally, let's say we're playing here. Let's say we're in the arpeggiator mode, we're playing, and we hit stop. It automatically puts us in that play mode, so we are now ready to play something manually. Let's try that. If you are holding a note down, you cannot start and stop as long as a note is being held at that time. The other thing I should point out is when we go to our load screen here, we see sound and sequence. So your ARPs and your sequences are going to be saved off with each individual sound. So right now, if we're working with 303 sound demo, Whatever we've got going on here, it's going to store all these settings, your transpositions, your scales, your ranges, your tempo, your swing amount, all the notes that are entered in here. We can just go ahead and say save, and that's exactly the way everything's going to be saved. Like for instance, if we go somewhere else, let's go to maybe one of these other 303 things here. Go ahead and load that. So we just loaded the sound and sequence. We go there. Let's try a different one. See, our tempo is now 120. Let's go back here to the load, and I'm going to select just a sequence. So I'm going to play this sound using the other sequence that we created. And the other thing to notice is, watch, when we load that sound, our tempo is going to change too to whatever we saved it at. So I think that last one was 128 or 29 beats per minute. This one's 120. So let's go ahead and load that. So it's still using the sound from our last preset, but we're now using the sequence from the demo we just created here. And if we want to go, we can just load the sound as well. And now it should sound a little different. So when you queue up a new sound or sequence to load, and the sequencer's running, it's going to wait until it reaches the loop point here before it tries to load that in, and just to make everything make sense. Now the loading of sounds and sequences is partially determined by the read-write speed of your micro SD memory card here, and it might also depend on how much information you have on the card. For instance, if you just have 100 preset sounds and sequences on the card, chances are it's going to load those a lot faster than, say, if you've got 1,000 and you're up in the 1,000th location on the memory card trying to load from there, just due to the nature of the memory architecture and how it loads that stuff in. But you can usually get away with loading just a sound by itself or just a sequence by itself while the sequencer's playing. So when we've got MIDI set up to sync, let's go ahead and reverse our process here. I'm going to pull the cables out of my TR-505 off screen here and plug them in, so that now the TR-505 MIDI out is going to the MIDI in here. I'm going to set up my MIDI pages on the 505, turn MIDI sync off, and now I'm ready to go. Okay, let me go ahead and start playback on the drum machine. And I can adjust the tempo. And then when I hit stop on my master clock, which is the 2R505, the Vectra stops as well. Now, whenever the Vectra is set to MIDI sync here, it is going to ignore any incoming MIDI notes and other information that would try to play it, because it's just trying to play itself with its own internal sequencer. Now, if we were to turn this off, and we have a master MIDI device such as a keyboard controller or your digital audio workstation, and we route the MIDI out of that master device into the Vectra, now the Vectra is going to be looking at this MIDI channel that's in our master pages here, and that's the MIDI channel that it's going to respond to as well as send to. MIDI is very simple on this thing. Basically, if you don't want it to respond to MIDI, just don't send it. If you do want it to respond, send it. Just make sure you're set up to the same MIDI channel on the sending and receiving device. And again, if you want to just sync up to MIDI, you turn that on, send clock, start, stop messages from your master MIDI clock, and the Vectra will start syncing to that. You turn this off, and anytime the sequencer is playing by its own internal clock, it'll automatically send MIDI clock start stop messages out the MIDI out port to control any devices that might be connected up and set up to sync their playback to this master clock. Alright, now I've changed my setup a little bit. I've routed the MIDI out of the Vectra, into the MIDI in of an excess virus that's off the screen here. And I just wanted to show you how we can control or play an external sound module using the Vectra. So we can use the keyboard here, we can use a pitch bend, mod wheel, send velocity and aftertouch. The other thing I want to show you is as I'm holding a note, I can change the MIDI channel, and then when I let go of that note and play a new note, I'm going to be playing on that other MIDI channel. So there's channel 2. We can also go in here and use our sequencer to play that external sound module. Now we might want to select a different sound. As a final example, I'm going to show you how we can control the Vectra with an external keyboard. So off to the side here, I've got a full 61 note, 5-octave keyboard. I've got its MIDI out routed to the MIDI in of the Vectra. I just go here, make sure my MIDI channel is set up on the same channel as my master controller. And so I can play the Vectra with full 5 octaves of keys. I can send it mod wheel, pitch bend, velocity, aftertouch, and control those sounds. Now the other thing I'd like to show you here is as I'm playing this, I can also use the controls on the Vectra's front panel, including pitch bend and mod wheel. Now our filter, we've got our lock on. So for some of you, you may be more accustomed to your traditional mechanical key beds, and you may prefer the feel of those. There's very little benefit using an external keyboard versus the Vectra's keyboard, because this is designed to work with this sound engine. If there are any benefits, it's that you have that 5-octave range instead of more of a limited octave range, even though we can go in here and select different scales to get much wider range. The other thing I would say is your traditional FITAR type key bed is probably going to have a better velocity feel for the keys as far as you're hitting them compared to, say, the Vectras here, where you kind of have to develop a new feel on how much of your finger you're playing or the pad to adjust that velocity amount per each note. But otherwise, I would say there really is not much benefit in using an external keyboard to play this sound module. Again, everything we've designed here, whether it's the keyboard or the sequencer, is really designed specifically for the features in here. Now, one other thing I'll point out here is even though we've got these scales here, even if we're selected a major scale here, it doesn't matter when we send it notes from our external keyboard controller. And that's because since you already have that wide range of notes, we figure you're already going to be able to play whatever notes you want. And I guess that's my philosophy overall is if you've got something external that you're hooking up to the Vectra, we assume that you think it's more powerful than what we've already built into here. And so we expect you to rely on that device's capabilities and not so much on this one's, at least for the controllers and the sequencer. For instance, if you've got the Vectra hooked up to a DAW sequencer, we assume that you are doing that because you like the features and you like the workflow and you think it's more powerful than what we've already provided in here. So therefore, you're just going to rely on that device's feature set to play our sounds. Now when you go the other way and you play an external MIDI sound module with the Vectra, you do get access, the scales and all the cool sequencing features and fills and stuff so that you can control other sound modules in a similar way to the Vectra, although you don't get all the cool joystick stuff except for pitch bend and mod wheel here. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit through all these tutorial videos. I hope you picked up a few new tips and things that maybe you didn't pick up in the manual. And again, I would just encourage you to take the time to really look at all the features the Vectra has to offer and understand them so that you can really apply those to your workflow and the way you like to make music. Again, thank you for purchasing the Vectra and supporting our products. We really appreciate you. Thanks again. Enjoy your Vectra, and we'll talk to you later.